So when I was 13, my parents took us on a trip to Robbers Cave National, or I guess it was a state park in Oklahoma. And it was a beautiful place. It was lots of woods, and there was a lake and lots of trails. And we brought a bunch of dirt bikes because my dad had a motorcycle shop, and we had a Hodaka 125 that we were taking all over the park. My brother loved to drive, I loved to ride on the back, so we were having a blast. We spent the entire day just going all through the park and jumping off and going into the lake to go for a swim. I had a swimsuit on with a t-shirt over it, and that's it. That's all my brother had on. We were having such a great time. It was a beautiful day. We were having so much fun. And then all of a sudden, he turns around a corner and he was going too fast to stop. There were a group of bicyclists in front of him. On each side were people walking, and he had no choice but to take it off the road. And when he took it off the road, it hit a tree. We hit a tree, and we both were knocked unconscious, and in that process the motorcycle landed on the side of my brother's face, and it almost missed his eye, barely missed his eye, and he had the whole side of his face nearly burned off. He spent years in the hospital having his skin, cosmetic surgery to try to repair the damage. He lived his entire life with the side of his face with this horrible scar that actually they managed to get smooth, so it was just discolored. It wasn't so much a bubbly scar. But he lived with that the rest of his life. And my mom, I don't think she ever forgave herself. I'm Melody Brooke. I'm a counselor, I'm an author, I'm a marriage and family therapist, I'm a speaker, and I'm a mom. I'm an actor and a filmmaker. And I have also suffered my share of trauma. And I know, looking back, how my mom's inability to forgive herself for many things, but most especially that, I think she carried that the rest of her life. Pretty sure she never forgave herself for that. And my mom suffered a great deal mentally, emotionally, physically. And I know that part of that was because of her lack of ability to forgive herself for something that she felt responsible for. So what I've learned is that in order to really live healthy and to live with ourselves, we have to have empathy for ourselves. At the time, the things my mom and dad were experiencing were it was in the summer of 1967 when this happened. So, my parents were young. My mom, it was my stepdad had to have been no older than about 28, and my mom was only a few years older than that. So they were young and they had not experienced a lot, and this was a time when they were really enjoying friendships and connection, and that moment of her being distracted by all of that is when this horrible stuff happened. And I don't know about you, but I have 3 children, 3 amazing children, and I know that I had moments when I neglected them, when I wasn't paying attention, when things could have happened that did not, thank God, happen. But in order to move forward through our lives, through our healing, through our ability to stay present and available to not only ourselves, but to the people in our lives, we have to learn to develop the self-empathy. We have to look back at ourselves with some compassion and be able to be a forgiving presence for ourselves. Because we can literally destroy our nervous system, we can destroy our immune system, we can destroy our will to live, we can destroy our emotional state and our relationships. Everything about us can be destroyed by this thought process inside of our own brain that can keep us from moving forward and having a full life. I know my brother never held it against her. he knew he was the one that had decided to ride that bike that day and not, not pay attention. He knew he was young, and it just, these things happen when we're young. We make stupid mistakes. So being able to find forgiveness for ourselves, I know that can be a challenge, but first off, we have to address the grief and the pain of what occurred. And for many of us, we kind of stick that grief and that pain down somewhere, often a separate part of our mind, and we try to ignore it, try to pretend it's not there, and it just continually creeps in this form of self-loathing when we cannot forgive ourselves for things that we might have done that we later regret. And I don't know anyone who's lived to be very old and to be an adult that doesn't have plenty of things that we can look back on and say to ourselves, oh my God, that was so stupid. I can't believe I did that, and have to live with the consequences, whatever those were. And I can say that for myself. There are plenty of things that have happened in my long life that I regret and realize the damage of the impact of my own behavior, and how much I have to own that truth without destroying myself. And boy, is that tough. I know how tough that is. But in order to move ourselves out of that cycle of egocentrism that keeps us focused on our own pain and our own misery, in order to be able to be available to the people who maybe we have damaged through our behavior, we have to accept that we are human and that we make mistakes, and that we too deserve forgiveness. And that self-forgiveness is such a huge part of building our immune system, of allowing us to feel like we have a right to be in this world. And if we can't let ourselves off it doesn't mean letting ourselves off the hook. I want to make that clear. It doesn't totally mean letting us off the hook, because there is a way in which we can take ownership of our behavior without having to beat the crap out of ourselves. And we're not taught that. We're not taught that way to live in the world. We're taught that we're bad, we're horrible, we have to think these horrible things about ourselves to suppress our urge to do those things again. That is such a destructive way of managing mistakes. It prevents us from being able to learn from those mistakes, because we think we are horrible because we've done something that we later regret. And the truth is, all of us are human. We do make mistakes, and sometimes they have terrible consequences. Sometimes we have to really allow ourselves to feel the grief of those consequences before we can have some sense of self-love, self-empathy, self-compassion, and forgive ourselves for being a human being who makes mistakes. And, try to find some way to find some meaning out of what happened, so that we can move forward without destroying ourselves and the people around us. Because I honestly believe that a whole lot of addictions, compulsions, risky behavior, bad relationships come out of a basic core lack of self-forgiveness. And if we can allow ourselves to own our truths, own what happened, own our mistakes, and feel the grief of it, and allow ourselves to forgive the human being who was flawed, like all human beings are, so that we can move forward in our lives with some confidence and some sense of self-acceptance, and some sense of that we matter even though we make mistakes. I mean, I can imagine that you must think of some people in your life whom you have forgiven for things that were awful, and yet you recognize they're human, they made a terrible mistake, and that you can forgive them in spite of that, because you understand that they're human, and you can love them anyway. And if we can give that to someone else, why can't we give that to ourselves? We have to learn to be able to do that for ourselves. And sometimes, depending on how horrific the thing might have been in our own mind anyway, we might need to get some help processing through that and finding a way to let go of that self-loathing that comes with a lack of self-forgiveness. Because if we are to grow, if we are to become whole, if we are to be able to be present for maybe even the very people who we harmed in our past behavior, we have to move to a place of self-forgiveness, even if that means living with the fact they can't forgive us, and understanding and having compassion for that. That is a real challenge, because I know for myself, when it's brought up to me some of the things that have happened in my past that I feel a great deal of pain over, some things that were attributed to my behavior specifically, it's very, very painful to address it and own it and speak the truth of it and to apologize for it and to recognize that I don't have to hate myself just because I did something stupid, something ridiculous, something neglectful, something that was harmful to the very people that I most love, and to be able to own that and still know that I can love myself in that process it's a very big challenge. And for those of us who have a lot of trauma, we might have different parts of ourselves that have to let go, have to find that forgiveness for ourselves. So doing the work of getting into our internal systems and understanding what parts of ourselves might be still holding on to that self-loathing is part of that process too. And I know that sounds a little out there, but that's where therapist comes in. So if you've done the work of forgiving yourself for the things you know about, and yet you still are aware that you're feeling really badly about yourself, that's the time you want to reach out and get some therapy to help you sort out what parts of yourself might still be holding on to that self-loathing and that unforgiveness. Do the work. You are worth it. You are a beautiful child of God, and you deserve to live on this planet with all of who you are, all of your mistakes, all of your wonderful gifts, all of who you are. And to do that work, it might be painful, but I promise you, in the end, you're worth it. It's worth it. I'm going to see, I noticed some people are here today. I'm really happy to see that. So let me see. Christy says, the grief of the consequences, that's where I get stuck. It never ends. Except that we are human and make mistakes, and we deserve forgiveness, self-forgiveness. That's right. Thank you, Inetta, and thank you, Christy. Yeah, those consequences, man, it's so hard to live with those consequences. Like I said, I have my share of my own consequences that I have to live with. And, it's like, I could beat myself up for what happened with my brother. I was the older sister, I was 13, he was only 11. And yet I can recognize that I was a little girl. And even at 13, I really did not recognize the danger. And so I can forgive that little girl, that 13-year-old girl who did not recognize the danger, didn't understand the consequences, couldn't understand the consequences. And even some of the things that happened as an adult that had some negative consequences, being able to embrace my younger self and recognize that I did the best I could at the time and grieve for those consequences. In order to embrace and forgive, you have to recognize that every one of us, we really are doing the best we can at the time with the information that we have. And that information sometimes is polluted by our childhood experiences that cause us to not understand what the consequences of what we're doing, right? We're still maybe partly a child in our behavior. And having empathy for that and taking ownership of it at the same time. Yes, those consequences, they break my heart when I think about them. And I know that I am a human deserving of forgiveness. We're all humans deserving of forgiveness, especially when we choose to heal and move forward and become and do more with our life. And we are able to recognize that younger version of ourselves really was in a terrible place, making terrible decisions based on stuff that I could not help at that time. And now that I know better, as Oprah says, I do better. And that's all that's ever required of us. And in order to know better and do better, the first step of that is really finding a way to forgive ourselves for those things which we wish hadn't occurred, that we wish we hadn't have done, and embracing and grieving the grief of that consequence. And then moving on into treating ourselves with the forgiveness and love that we deserve.